Week 14 is officially under wraps, and congrats to you guys for clinching your spot in the fantasy playoffs. Now the second season starts this week. You guys are in the playoffs. You guys need to know what to do on the waiver wire to position yourself for the ultimate goal, and that is going to be the championship. A ton of critical information in fantasy football over these last couple of weeks, and now a stacked waiver pool entering week one of these fantasy playoffs. So even if you have a bye week, you have to be proactive. You have to make sure you get these best players available over on the waiver wire if you have the opportunity. So if you guys enjoy, make sure you leave a like down below. Comment your biggest waiver questions in the comments. I'll try to get to as many as possible. And of course, if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. We are on the road to 40,000. I appreciate you guys for that continued support. But with that being said, let's get right into it. All right, we are in the fantasy playoffs, so I'll try to keep this a little bit more rapid than usual. You guys made it here for a reason. You guys have a good head on your shoulders. I'll just outline the guys, why they're pickups, and why you should be spending X amount of fab on these certain players. So let's start off with these should-be rostered players, guys that are rostered in over 50% of sleeper leagues, but if they are available on your wire, they would have been found in this video today. Ezekiel Elliott, running back of the New England Patriots. Obviously, Ramondre Stevenson is sidelined. Ezekiel Elliott, big-time fantasy performance on Thursday Night Football. I think we can look at him as a top 20 running back moving forward. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, running back of the Kansas City Chiefs, is rostered in over 50% of the leagues. I will be going through his teammate later on in the video, but Clyde Edwards-Helaire, if he is available, would also be a top 10 pickup on the week. Keaton Mitchell, running back of the Baltimore Ravens. We aren't quite seeing that bell cow usage just yet, but we do see explosive play. We do see him potentially getting a bigger role moving forward. And as we know, the Baltimore Ravens are one of the best offenses in the league. So you definitely want to target Keaton Mitchell if he is available on your wire. Noah Brown, wide receiver of the Houston Texans. Obviously, a big downside here is that CJ Stroud did suffer that concussion against the New York Jets. But with Noah Brown, you're getting potentially the wide receiver one on this team. In terms of volume alone, I think he has to be a pickup and is a viable top 45 wide receiver with both Tank Dell and Nico Collins on the shelf. Odell Beckham Jr., wide receiver of the Baltimore Ravens, mentioned how strong this offense is when I talked about Keaton Mitchell. He's really established himself as a clear-cut top 2 option in this offense with Zay Flowers, and I do think, like I mentioned, going forward with how Lamar Jackson played this week, Odell Beckham has a big-time wide receiver 3 ceiling, and if he's available, he'd be one of the top names on this list. And then finally, rapid firing the last 4, Matthew Stafford, quarterback of the LA Rams. Big advantageous matchup this week against the Washington Commanders, who have been one of the worst defenses at stop in the past all year. Stafford himself has played much better football in these last couple of weeks and had a big-time performance against the Ravens. So I do think he keeps momentum. I do think this Rams passing game is good. And I do think they build momentum, like I mentioned, in the fantasy playoffs as they gun towards clinching a wildcard spot in the NFC. Isaiah Likely, tight end of the Baltimore Ravens, big-time performance, 5 catches, 83 yards, big-time touchdown. I do think he can be considered a top 12 option at tight end moving forward. Antonio Gibson, running back of the Washington Commanders. We did see prior to the bye week that Brian Robinson got hurt, and with him expected to miss some time, I do think Antonio Gibson can be a viable fantasy football running back. And then finally, Gerald Everett, tight end of the Los Angeles Chargers. If you're in a pinch, I do think that Gerald Everett is a sneaky pickup. But now let's go right into the list, starting off with number 10, Joshua Palmer of the LA Chargers, rostered in 37% of sleeper leagues. And Josh Palmer has been inactive for the Chargers in these last few weeks, obviously dealing with that knee injury he suffered earlier in the year. But we did see that once Mike Williams went down, the number 2 wide receiver, Joshua Palmer assumed that role. 5+ targets in 5 straight weeks between weeks 2 and 7. And although it is concerning that he's taken this long coming back from that knee injury, by all accounts, it sounds like the Chargers were just cautious in rushing him back. Obviously, you know, the big downside here is that you're losing Herbert potentially for the rest of the season, but I'm going to give Easton Stick the benefit of the doubt. Obviously, we've seen some very good quarterback play from backups in the last few weeks, guys like Joe Flacco, guys like Jake Browning on the other side. I think we should be giving the benefit of the doubt to Easton Stick, at least for now. And if he's even at all functional in this offense, I think Joshua Palmer has top 45 level appeal at the wide receiver position. 0 to 5% of the FAB because there's still a risk there with Easton Stick at the quarterback, but I do think Josh is a good enough player to be rostered in fantasy football. Zamir White and Ameer Abdullah of the Las Vegas Raiders come up next as my number 9 pickup. 6% and 0% rostered according to sleeper leagues for both of them respectively. And the big context here is that Josh Jacobs went down in the 4th quarter with that right knee injury after playing through pain for the majority of the week. Quick wraparound now, Thursday Night Football going up against the Chargers. I would be heavily shocked if Josh Jacobs actually suits up in this game. And if he were to miss, I think both of these guys are solid flex plays. Starting with Zamir White, you're expecting him to get that early down roll, goal line role for this Raiders team should assume the majority of the rushing work that Josh Jacobs leaves behind, while with Ameer Abdullah, you can expect the passing work, you can expect the long down and distance, third down snaps to be able to go his way. It's a similar situation to that we saw with the Chiefs this past week. Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Jerick McKinnon. Ameer Abdullah maybe getting the more critical downs. Zamir White getting an overall bigger workload. Number 8 is Rico Dowdle of my beloved Dallas Cowboys, rostered in 14% of sleeper leagues. And if you need instant utility, Dowdle may not be your guy. Obviously, with Tony Pollard as a running back for the Cowboys, he may not be a spot start right off the bat, but I do think he is one of the most valuable handcuffs in all of fantasy football. I've talked about the Cowboys offense a lot, but it's obviously a very, very good unit. 4th in terms of offensive yardage output per game, and the number 1 scoring offense in the entirety of the NFL. It's one of the best offenses in the league, like I kind of said, and despite not being up to expectations we had for him coming into the season, Tony Pollard has still been a top 10 overall running back in fantasy football this year. Rico Dowdle has assumed a clear-cut number 2 role, worked ahead of Deuce Vaughn, obviously worked ahead preseason-wise of a guy like Malik Davis. I think Rico Dowdle is the clear handcuff to Tony Pollard, and if he were to miss any time, he would be an RB1 in my ranking. So if he's still available on your wire, again, a complete implied upside play, but somebody I'd be willing to spend upwards of 10 to 15% of my fab on, knowing the upside that were to be the case if Tony Pollard missed any time in these fantasy football playoffs. Number 7 pickup is going to be Wan'Dale Robinson of the New York Giants, currently rostered in 17% of sleeper leagues. A guy I'd be willing to spend upwards of 10 to 15% of my fab on as well. And with Wan'Dale Robinson, he had an extremely impressive showing this Monday Night Football against the Green Bay Packers this week. 115 yards from scrimmage on the 9 opportunities he's had, and he was playing more snaps on the offense than we had seen up to this point. It really seems like it's safe to say at this point that the Giants held back his usage earlier in the year. He's recovering from that ACL tear. They didn't want to rush him back early, but it really looks like Wan'Dale Robinson has that explosive do-it-all player feel that he did at the tail end of the year for the New York Giants last year. With Tommy DeVito playing well for this offense, it's functioning at a higher level than people anticipated. The Giants have won 3 games in a row and are in the midst of the NFC wildcard. I do think Wan'Dale Robinson has wide receiver 4 utility for the time being, with a wide receiver 3 ceiling in this offense. Like I said, 10 to 15% of my fab, don't want to overdo it, but it's very encouraging that he was involved at the capacity he was on Monday Night Football. Number 6 pickup of the week is going to be Zay Jones of the Jacksonville Jaguars, currently rostered in 43% of sleeper leagues. Another guy I'd be willing to spend upwards of 10 to 15% of my fab on, and the reason why I want Zay Jones is that he's commanded 22 targets in his last 2 games, including 14 this past week, with Christian Kirk obviously going to be out for the rest of the regular season with that groin injury he sustained. We saw the Jaguars consolidate their targets between Calvin Ridley, Evan Ingram, and Zay Jones this past week, and I expect them to continue leaning on their best offensive players moving forward. Upside wide receiver 3 with Trevor Lawrence healthy moving forward, and someone that has spike week potential if the offense does click in the playoff weeks. Number 5 pickup is Demario Douglas of the New England Patriots, rostered in 29% of sleeper leagues. I'd be willing to spend upwards of 15 to 20% of my fab on Demario Douglas, and here's why. 6+ targets and firm control of the Patriots wide receiver 1 spot prior to the concussion he suffered in the late stages of that Week 12 game against the Giants. I think he should be able to return this week after missing the last 2 games, and I expect him to reassume that role. 11 PPR points per game in that 5-game stretch, and he was establishing himself as a clear-cut top 40 weekly option, and with his youth, with his speed that he brings to the table, I think he has top 30 level upside moving forward. 15 to 20% of my fab, like I said, it seems reasonable for a guy like Demario Douglas, and the reason why I prefer him over guys like Zay Jones and Wan'Dale Robinson is because he proved it over that 5-game stretch, whereas it's more of a projection with those other 2 guys. Number 4 pickup of the week is going to be Chase Brown, running back of the Cincinnati Bengals, rostered in 13% of sleeper leagues. Guy I'd be willing to spend upwards of 15 to 20% of my fab on. And like I mentioned with Rico Dowdle, it's a very similar outlook for Chase Brown in my opinion. In terms of the implied upside, he's the clear number 2 back with a high ceiling if Joe Mixon were to go down. Only he also saw some third down work this last week and has shown he can be efficient in both the rushing and the receiving elements of his game. Love Chase Brown, the prospect at Illinois, super explosive athlete with a natural 3-down skill set. And the Cincinnati offense has functioned much better than expected with Jake Browning at quarterback. And while Mixon has been great in fantasy as of late, it's mostly been due to his workload rather than the sheer talent he's been displaying on the field. A ton of opportunities plays, and the scoring chances have been in abundance for the offense as of late. And with Joe Mixon, if you were to miss any time, I think you can plug Chase Brown as a top 15 level option in your lineup. So like I said, very similar to Rico Dowdle. The reason why I prefer him to Rico Dowdle is because he has more of a third down outlook. And like we've seen in recent weeks, Joe Mixon has been getting a full share of the inside the 5 work. Number 3 pickup of the week is going to be Ty Chandler, running back of the Minnesota Vikings, currently rostered in 29% of sleeper leagues. Guy I'd be willing to spend upwards of 20 to 25% of my fab on. Alexander Mattison suffered an ankle injury early in the third quarter this week. Chandler assumed full bell cow duties once he went down. 40 snaps and 23 routes run, as well as 15 opportunities with Alexander Mattison out of the lineup. The offense is struggling as a whole, only 3 points scored on the Las Vegas Raiders this past week. That really feels like an outlier, and the team that has the weapons that they do with TJ Hawkinson, Jordan Addison, and obviously Justin Jefferson will be able to score more points on a weekly basis. And like we have seen, once they get inside the 5, once they get inside the 10-yard line, Alexander Mattison has seen some success. So with Ty Chandler, I think he can be viewed without Alexander Mattison in the lineup as a top 25 level running back. And if you're desperate for running back production, I think he is the number 3 pick of the week. Like I said, 20 to 25% of the fab is what I'd be willing to spend on Chandler if you need a running back. And going on to number 2, very, very similar case to that of Ty Chandler. We have Deontay Foreman, running back of the Chicago Bears, rostered in 39% of sleeper leagues, and a guy I'd be willing to spend upwards of 20 to 25% of my fab on as well. We saw Deontay Foreman reclaim his number 1 role in this backfield. 55% of the snaps assumed all of the early down and goal line work for this Bears offense. While I do expect Herbert and Roschon to continue spelling him, especially in long down and distance and 2-minute situations, I think Deontay Foreman has a stranglehold on the goal line work for an offense that has been functioning much better with Justin Fields on the field. Tough matchup against Cleveland this week, but the Browns defense, for as good as it's been, has allowed 27 and 36 points respectively to the Jaguars and the Rams in these last couple of weeks. I think the Bears will be able to put up a fight in this game, and if Foreman gets another 15 plus touch workload, I think he has utility in your lineup. Not to mention, again, tougher matchup this week, but if you're able to advance this round and go to the semifinals, Deontay Foreman will be playing the Arizona Cardinals, which is one of the most advantageous matchups for opposing running backs in fantasy this year. So with Deontay Foreman, a little bit lesser of a ceiling, but a high floor given the touch workload we can expect this week. And obviously against Arizona, he is in a prime smash spot to give you a ton of points. So love Deontay Foreman. 20 to 25% I think is reasonable on him this week. And then finally, my number 1 waiver pickup of the week, rostered in 49% of sleeper leagues, barely made the cut. We have Jerick McKinnon of the Kansas City Chiefs, a guy I'd be willing to spend 25 to 30% of my fab on. And Jerick McKinnon was technically the running back 2 for Kansas City in terms of raw usage to CAH. He ceded the majority role and overall touch workload to Clyde Edwards-Helaire in this past week's game. But with Jerick McKinnon, he got the snaps in consequential situations. Goal line, third down, and 2-minute work all went to Jerick McKinnon this week. In crunch game with the game on the line, they trusted Jerick McKinnon in their most valuable situations. This pickup is obviously tentative based on the health of Isaiah Pacheco. If he's expected to play in week 15, obviously we take him out. But if Isaiah Pacheco were to miss any more weeks, I think Jerick McKinnon should be viewed as an RB2 in fantasy. The offense has not played well this year, but obviously it's still Patrick Mahomes. And if he does figure out how to put up points at the end of the day, which he has throughout his career, McKinnon has the opportunity to repeat his fantasy playoffs from a year ago, where he was one of the absolute league winners in fantasy. So with Jerick McKinnon, for that implied upside alone, I think he has to be the number 1 pickup of the week. And for the time being, I think he has RB2 level utility. But either way, if you guys enjoyed, make sure you leave a like down below. Like I mentioned, comment your biggest waiver wire decision. I'll try to get to as many as possible. And of course, hit that subscribe button. We're on the road to 40,000. I appreciate you guys for that continued support. But with that being said, good luck in your matchups. Go make your semifinals. Take care.